Rin Tin! Eu cresci vibrando com o menino Rusty e seu fiel Rin Tin Tin. O seriado americano era um dos maiores sucessos da TV na época. Recentemente, li a biografia de Rin Tin Tin, escrita pela jornalista Susan Orlean, e me apaixonei de novo pelo pastor alemão mais famoso da história. Foi um prazer conversar com Susan sobre o cão que foi uma das maiores estrelas do cinema mudo e quase ganhou um Oscar de melhor ator.
Take us there, boy. Let's go, Boone.
E depois renasceu na televisão. Agora é Susan quem mantém viva a lenda de que Rin Tin Tin é para sempre.
In Brazil, we call that famous dog Rin Tin Tin. That's how we pronounce it in Portuguese. How is it in English?
It's Rin Tin Tin.
Yeah, and but we can call it Rinty, like in the TV show Yo Rinty. How is it in English?
Yo Rinny, or as Lee Duncan called him, Rinty.
Okay, it's interesting that in the period of the silent movies, everybody wanted to see animals in films. It was a huge craze for animals. And now, in the internet age again, some people say that the internet is just for watching dogs and cats. So many animals around. Isn't that funny?
It's part of human nature, I think. We will simply always love looking at animals.
I grew up watching Rin Tin Tin on TV, the TV show in the 50s when I grew up. And I never knew before reading your book that he was a huge star in the silent movies, even bigger star.
That was one of my motivations for doing the book, because I was aware of the TV show. I assumed that he was a character, not a real dog, and that his life began and ended in the 50s and 60s with the television show. I stumbled across the fact that this was a real dog, born not in the 1950s, but in 1918 on a battlefield in World War I, who had had a career that was enormous, an international success in the 1920s in silent film. And it was astonishing. It would be as if we discovered that Justin Bieber had also had a career in the 1920s. I mean, it was absolutely fascinating, and certainly the story of how he became a star was so intriguing to me, and just a wonderful story.
There were other dogs in movies and other animals, but he was the one who became a huge star.
Yeah.
What was special about this dog that he became such a... Some people said that he was a better actor than humans.
He was certainly the star of his films, and he was paid sometimes as much as 8 times what the human actors in his films were being paid. If you watch those movies, the fact is that he truly is the star, and he is absolutely engaging in a way that the human actors, most of whom we've totally forgotten, were not as compelling. Why, though, was he the one dog that we really still remember? Because there were at least 80 other German Shepherds starring in films in the 1920s. And I would say, except for me, because I've spent the last 10 years learning about this, most people don't remember any of those other dogs. They're lost to the sands of time. He was a better actor. He had a way of showing emotion that was really notable. The screenplays for the movies were probably better than the ones being written for these other animals. And as he became more successful, the human actors that were in his movies were better too. It still, though, comes down to him. He had a quality of emotion, and often it was an emotion of a kind of melancholy that I happen to think people were really drawn to. There was something about him that made you want to watch and you felt a sort of soulfulness about him that many other dogs in movies are cute or they're athletic, but they don't have that quality that makes you think he's got real feelings.
And of course, behind Rin Tin Tin, there's this man, this young soldier, Lee Duncan, an American who went to France and found this puppy. In French, it was Rin Tin Tin. That was the name that he gave him because of a doll, right? In
Yes.
France, Rin Tin Tin. And he was the guy who trained and who was always behind this dog, who kept that legend alive. Who was Lee Duncan?
Lee Duncan grew up in California. He didn't have a father, and interestingly, in many of the films that Rin Tin Tin was in, there were often storylines that involved not having a parent. He was a very solitary man. Even as a young man, he really spent almost all his time alone or with pets. He always loved animals. When he found the puppy in the war, on the battlefield, many other soldiers would have just said, well, I'm in the middle of a war, I can't deal with a puppy. Instead, Lee devoted himself to he actually found 2 puppies, devoted himself to bringing these dogs home.
This was Rin Tin Tin and Annette.
And they were brother and sister from the same litter. Nanette. And then Nanette actually died when they first got back to the U.S. Lee never had another profession. His entire life was about developing this dog into a star. He didn't have any aspirations himself to be famous, to be in movies, to be really even to be wealthy. That was never his motivation. His motivation was he felt this dog was exceptional, that he had a quality that was extraordinary, and he wanted everyone in the world to know it. And that's what he did with his life.
It's funny that in 27, when the Academy Awards were created, Rin Tin Tin actually won Best Actor. How was that?
Well, it's funny. If you were looking at the films at the time and just evaluated who was the biggest star, who was the most successful star, absolutely Rin Tin Tin was the case. Now, this is apparently, some people are disputing this and saying this is just a rumor and never happened, and they never kept the ballots. So we can't really confirm this. But there was a lot of awkwardness, thinking, well, what if the Academy Awards were a brand new award ceremony, nothing like what we know today. And I think there was this concern that it would make it look silly.
So he got the vote and then they
gave it to a human who nobody even remembers now, and which is, again, proof that an award doesn't necessarily guarantee you fame everlasting.
He made all that money, but did he lead the life of a movie star?
Well, yes and no. He was certainly well treated, and his concerns were attended to. Most of the rumors about his lavish lifestyle, the diamond collar, the golden bowl that he drank from, those are Hollywood myth. Lee believed that he was a dog and that he should live like a dog, but a very well cared for dog, not as some crazy, diva with ridiculous surroundings. So he lived in a dog kennel. But he was, of course, very well cared for. And the original Rin Tin Tin lived to be 13, which for a big dog is quite old. So obviously he had the finest medical care, the best food, the best, comfort that he could be afforded.
Is it true that he died in the arms of the biggest movie star at the time, Jean Harlow?
Again, another Hollywood myth that was instantly circulated, that he leaped into her arms and then died in her arms. It's very dramatic. Jean Harlow did live near Lee Duncan on the same street in Beverly Hills. But as far as I know, having read Lee's own journal, the dog was out in the yard playing. He made a funny noise. Lee came out to see what was going on. The dog collapsed and died. Probably a heart attack or an aneurysm or something quite immediate. I don't believe Jean Harlow appeared in the death scene in any way, but everything about Rin Tin Tin was full of myth because he was that kind of star, and people could project almost more onto him than they might onto a human because of that mysteriousness.
But even before he died, his career had more or less stalled because of the talkies.
Yes.
Right? So he was fired from Warner Brothers because dogs can't talk.
Right.
Now everybody has to talk.
And this was a huge crisis because he had made film after film for Warner Brothers, very successful. Then Warner Brothers, and this is just what we see today, new technology comes and there's always a scramble to adapt to the new technology. Talking films were a huge breakthrough. Not only did Rin Tin Tin lose his job, many human actors didn't make the transition because they opened their mouths and they had squeaky voices or unpleasant voices. But Lee ended up getting a new contract with a smaller film company and began making serial films with a company called Mascot Pictures that made a lot of westerns. And they were very successful. Even though it was no longer the A-list of Warner Brothers, they were fantastically profitable and gave a whole new lease on his life as an actor.
After Rin Tin Tin died, so there was his son, Rin Tin Tin Jr.
Yes.
Not as successful, right?
No, he was, first of all, he was not a very pretty dog. He also just wasn't a good performer. And that's where you can look at the original Rin Tin Tin and appreciate the fact that he actually was a very good actor. Junior was a dog who could respond to commands, but he didn't convey any sort of emotion or subtlety. He just wasn't a good actor, and he was not very successful. Lee then moved him kind of out of the spotlight and had another dog who was quite successful. He called him Rin Tin Tin III. There's some question about whether he actually was a blood relative of the first Rin Tin Tin or not. But he was very successful making talking films, but also he went out on the vaudeville circuit and performed in live theater.
On stage.
Yeah. And apparently it was an incredible show. People flocked to it. Again, a huge success. Lots of work. I would say for Lee at that point in his life, as he was getting a little older and he was traveling day after day to perform with the dog, which would be a much more demanding kind of profession than having your dog in a movie.
Then in the 50s, much later, television came and Rin Tin Tin became again a huge worldwide success. How that happened? It was not one of those descendants of Rin Tin Tin, was it?
Well, the dog. Well, actually, it's a complicated story. The idea of reviving the Rin Tin Tin brand was very much related to Lee and the actual dogs. And a producer named Burt Leonard, who he met with, and they really hit it off and saw that this legendary figure of this German Shepherd that people associated with certain qualities, loyalty, intelligence, strength, something very particular. He felt there was no reason it couldn't be reinvented again.
Ready. Volte para o parque e traga ajuda. Ande, vamos carrete. Vá.
So he wrote a storyline that would be for the television show, that it would be set in during the Indian Wars in the late 1800s. The dogs that performed in the show as Rin Tin Tin were not actually the physical dog that Lee owned. That dog, Lee's dog, made appearances, appeared as the official Rin Tin Tin, but the dogs that were used in the TV show belonged to a trainer Lee was not in good health at that point, so they hired a young man named Frank Barnes to be the trainer for the show, and he used his dogs. But those are the dogs we all associate with as being Rin Tin Tin, the big blonde and black German Shepherd, and they were gorgeous dogs, and they did a great job.
That was close.
Too close. Where's Rennie? O'Hara?
O'Hara was a hero, Lieutenant. He fought a delaying action, all by himself, against terrible odds.
The TV shows were shot in black and white, and then
Yes.
they were turning to color. How was it?
At the time that the show was being made, color was just beginning, and it was very expensive, and there was almost no one had a color TV set. So the studio, which was trying to do this very cheaply, just said, no, we don't want to shoot in color. That's a fad, and we don't want to spend the money. So they shot in black and white. Well, color TV, once it clicked and it became such a rage, Burt Leonard, the producer of the show, felt that one essential item missing in keeping the show in reruns and keeping it still current would be to colorize it. And that meant literally hand coloring the frames.
One interesting thing in your acknowledgments is that you thank your Twitter followers. I'm one of them. You have more than 200,000 Twitter followers. And while you were writing the book, and it's young people, basically, right?
Yeah.
So why these young people who never grew up with Rin Tin Tin are in love with Rin Tin Tin?
I think people love good stories.
Yeah.
And I think that it doesn't require that you ever saw the show to find the story. First of all, the people and their lives, to me, were fascinating. I mean, just the story of what it would have been like to be Lee Duncan, growing up at that time that it feels so different to imagine living through World War I and Hollywood in its earliest days. So I think there's a lot of interest in history through this very individual, personal perspective. And people love animals.
Rin Tin Tin.
Friendships are born in unexpected ways.
Orders have come down. You and Private Gatto will be joining the 135th as of tomorrow. What about Renty? Dogs are not too high on most people's priority list. He saved my life.
There's a quote that I love in your book. The lesson we have yet to learn from dogs that could sustain us is that having no apprehension of the past or future is not limiting but liberating. Do you think that animals live in the present?
Very much. And I think that is what's both astonishing about them and admirable. They really do live for now. They don't relate to the past. They don't fear the future. And of course, for most human beings, the fear of the ultimate, namely death, is very much part of what we're all about. And animals are completely free of that sort of burden which makes them both seem innocent, but also they are truly of the moment. And I always laugh when I leave the house, I say goodbye to my dog, and then I realize I forgot something in the house, and I come back, 1 minute has passed, my dog throws herself at me with this joy, and I think I've only been gone 1 minute. But it's the moment she's experiencing, which is, I've come back. It doesn't matter that I was only away for 1 minute. And there's something wonderful about that, I think.
Yeah, I'll go back to your quote. Rin Tin Tin did not need to be remembered in order to be happy. For him, it was always enough to have that instant when the sun was soft, when the ball was tossed and caught, when the beloved rubber doll was squeaked. He had a little doll like most dogs have a favorite toy.
Yeah.
Such a moment was complete in itself, pure and sufficient.
I think that is also the beauty of animals, that's that sense of their completeness, that for them, the pat on the head, the moment is in and of itself what life is all about. And it really moved me to think about that, especially when you're, say, in the middle of a project, like writing a book, and there's so much anxiety about finishing the book, how the book will be received. You know, this is the way humans are. We're so busy worrying about the outcome, or the idea that what we're experiencing right now isn't quite enough, that you could be richer, you could be doing more. You know, there's always that feeling of what's missing. And I think that thinking so much about animals as I did working on this book made me really appreciate how they have a very simple algorithm, which is just, right now I'm happy, and that's all that matters. And that's kind of inspiring, I think.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
That was wonderful.